All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call to order the March 1st, 2022 Finance Committee meeting. Carrie, would you please call the roll?
Councilor Bell?
Here.
Councilor Sullivan?
Here.
And Mayor Smith?
Here. We have before us the minutes of the February 1st, 2022 Finance Committee meeting. Unless there are edits, changes, or deletions, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that has been approved. Do we want to close this door? We'll have to close it all the way. Yes. Now is the time on our agenda for public comments. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the committee? So you have 3 minutes. Please state your name and address. There being none, I will now close the public comments. First item on the agenda is an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of water and sewer system revenue bonds of the city of Winchester, Virginia, in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $7,560,000 to finance the cost of certain capital improvement projects, presented by Mary Blow. Good afternoon, Mary.
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. This is an authorizing ordinance for the VRA bond issuance. Perry spoke of these projects at our last Finance Committee meeting. He went into them pretty thoroughly, but it was the sanitary sewer trunk main lining and infrastructure replacements on North Washington, Morgan, and West Piccadilly streets. So I also included actually his packet in there so you could see that again, but these were the same projects. There have been no changes since the last meeting. This is just the authorizing ordinance to allow us to participate in the VRA spring bond financing pool. It is a max amount of $7,560,000. That includes cost of issuance, so that should cover the project cost and the cost of issuance. We hope to close bond sales around May 11th with the closing date about May 25th. We're trying to be very conservative. These are 20-year bonds, which I very much like doing. I'll recommend that every time I do an issuance. Annual debt service about $525,000. We think that rates, probably by the time we get to May, will be in the low 3s. We're not enjoying the 1.5 to 2s anymore. So hopefully we can get it in the 3.25 range. So that's the goal.
Okay.
That's all I had on that one.
Are there any questions for Mary?
I'm here. No?
Okay. If not, I will now entertain the motion to forward this item to council with the recommendation.
So moved. Second. Yeah, I approve.
So we have a motion to forward with approval.
Correct.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So that's been forwarded with approval. The next item is a resolution providing for the issuance and sale of a taxable water and sewer system revenue bond, Series 2022 of the city of Winchester, Virginia, in a principal amount not to exceed $7,560,000. Heretofore authorized and providing for the form, details, and payment thereof. Mary?
So this is the same that I just spoke of. I could say ditto to everything I just said, except this is the authorizing resolution. The only thing different you'll see attached to this at your March 22nd meeting will be the financing agreement. That's still being reviewed by the attorneys and our FA, financial advisor. So, which is very common. It's the same financing agreement, all looks fine.
Okay.
So this is just necessary to allow us to be in the pool.
Discussion? Motion?
Just for clarification, remind me again why we do this twice, once as an ordinance, once as a resolution. The resolution seems to have more detail in it.
Resolution is the form of the bond in it. There
Okay.
is more detail to it. This one just pretty much
So
saying
the ordinance authorizes the moving forward with it, and the resolution is
the
what we
form
actually
of,
do.
correct,
Got it.
correct.
I'll
Yes.
make a motion that we forward this with a recommendation for approval.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That has been forwarded with the motion for approval. The next item on the agenda is a resolution acquiring surplus school real property. Mary.
Thank you. we'll have to dig back to 2020 on this one a little bit. It was an MOU dated August 11th. The city had entered into with the school board. It was back when Mary Beth Price was here. That we said that when the DCLC was getting close to being completed, we would look at having the school board surplus their building to us, and then we would henceforth have our EDA sell that, and the proceeds would go back to the schools. We'd asked them at that time to use their year-end funds that they have. They usually have between $1.5 to $2 million for capital projects. They did not do that. Instead, we asked them to use it for DCLC, and when this building is sold, they could replenish their capital fund. So that was all memorialized in an MOU that I've attached. So with that said, we're to the point where the school board took the action. They surplus the property to the city. So this resolution allows us to accept that, and we will henceforth, and there's also an MOU that says they could stay till the end of the year with a small leaseback component, like a $10 consideration, something very small. They could stay while the EDA works to market the property. So we wanted, with the market being so good, hopefully that stays that way, we wanted to go ahead and give them as much time as possible to market it and get it showed to potential buyers. If this is approved, the EDA would need to adopt a resolution to accept the property and to begin marketing it. So that's it.
Questions for Mary?
Yeah,
Councilor Bell?
as it relates to the lease back, I mean, I understand the scenario and what we've set up here. There we're still, nothing changes from the city's perspective. The school board continues to maintain the building,
Yes.
responsible for
insurance, yes,
insurance, utilities, whatnot.
right.
Yeah.
They just couldn't make any capital improvements to it. They'd just be doing general operations. I mean, we know they'll take
Right.
care of the property.
And we, meaning the EDA, couldn't mobilize to market the property until they had control of the asset or they knew some date certain.
Correct.
Okay.
And we did, in respect to the folks at that building, we asked to put in let them have a 2-hour leeway in case there's anything sitting out so they can show potential.
For showing, right?
Yeah.
Councilor Sullivan?
This is kind of hinged upon DCLC being completed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is that, how's
Right.
that timeline looking?
They were, when we spoke with them, I believe the superintendent, and certainly when I talked to Ed Smith, believes at the end of the year, end of this calendar year,
Oh, okay.
would give them enough time. Hopefully, if that didn't happen, perchance, I know with everything going on in our, external environment right now, that we could work with a potential buyer.
Now, are they
Certainly
gonna
hope so.
try to do this end of calendar year or end of their school year? Like, do this move? They wouldn't want to move in the middle of the school year, I don't think.
We had calendar year in here, December.
They
Like
would
January,
be,
like January 1, I'm just curious.
yeah, calendar year for when they would complete the building. I don't know when they actually were going to schedule the move itself. It could, it's just administrative offices. I don't
Right.
want to speak for the superintendent, but
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think a mid-year move would be
But none of that really,
undoable.
really matters what we're doing here.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I think we could work that out with a potential buyer, whoever, hopefully we will have one. We just want to give them as much time to market at the EDA.
Yeah, what we didn't want to do was have them move out and then start
Yeah.
what is going to be obviously a lengthy process. That building's not going to be
Okay.
moved overnight.
Right.
So, if you could just refresh my memory, because I remember all the discussions that we had on this. So the EDA is going to facilitate the sale, and there was, and you have to help me with this, there was anything above 1.1 million, I believe, then the city,
Right.
can you help me with that?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, we promised them a minimum amount of 1.5 million.
Okay.
So if it's sold for one, we would need to plug the $500,000 gap.
Say that again?
We would need, if it just sold for 1 million, I don't think, I'm
Right.
not sitting there saying that's going, if it perchance would happen, then we'd need to give them at least 1.5 million. So the city would need to plug
Right.
that $500,000 gap.
But if it's sold for more,
they'll get more.
They'll get more,
Mhm.
and we won't get,
No.
okay.
I did not sign that agreement.
Councilor Bell.
I think the hope in that is that it's sold to a for-profit entity, so the city will get the tax revenue from an asset that's not been taxed forever. So,
Good point.
Certainly a benefit, right? That is definitely a benefit, but I agree. We'll get as much as we can for sure.
Yes.
We do want to try to replenish the reserves too, their capital reserves.
Are there any other questions? Okay, is there a motion?
Motion forward
With approval.
with approval.
second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So that is forwarded for approval. Favorable motion. So the next item is 2023 budget discussion. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, committee members. You find me staying here, or I'll move over here?
We are being televised, right?
Oh, that's
Yeah,
true.
so. The revolution will not be televised.
This is not a revolutionary budget, but it's been an interesting one with the impacts of inflation and rising prices having a pretty significant impact on the budget. So this is the first of what will be many budget discussions over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks. I've put the purpose of today is just to start to orient the committee on the two different scenarios that staff are currently looking at and to get any preliminary guidance from the committee to help shape us moving forward. The other aspects of the budget, the detailed budget discussions for each department, we will go through those at the committee level, at the relevant committees. So for example, Public Health and Safety Committee later this month will walk through the police and fire, DSS, detention, JDC, and other public safety related departments. The Planning and Economic Development Committee will walk through its relevant budgets. Finance Committee, you'll have another session at your first meeting in April where we'll go into depth on the administrative departments and Parks and Rec. So first of many discussions, what I'm going to walk through today is the summary and the two scenarios. The first table that I won't spend much time on it because it just is a reflection of all of the requests that were received. That's not my recommended budget. This just shows all of the requests that we received over the course of the last several months when we were going through budget discussions. Of course, we wanted you to see what the totality of requests are. The big things to point out here, this particular table just shows current revenues or total new revenues with existing rates. So this doesn't show any increase in property taxes, meal taxes, or any of the other funding sources we have. So total new revenue is a little over 5.6 million. That might sound like a great windfall, but we'll walk through why it is not quite that, because a lot of that is being driven by, a lot of our expenditures are being driven by higher costs.
One quick question. Just looking at these charts, they're not broken down by departments. I guess we have to assume.
Nope. We'll do detailed department discussions at future committee meetings. Today is a summary look at the entire city and the new expenditures and new revenues. So you'll see 5.688 in total new revenue. If you have specific questions about revenues and where that extra money is coming from, I'll ask Celeste to come up and get into the details of that. What I'm going to walk through is the expenditures. As I said, this first table is all of our requests, total requests over $8.5 million, leaving us with a deficit of 2.8 if we were to fund all of those things, but of course we are not. So I'll go to option one.
Can you make your screen bigger, please?
I think that
Perfect. Yeah, thank you.
So option one, I'll walk through these somewhat quickly. Feel free to jump in and ask questions at any point. Workers' comp increases, can't avoid that, so that's 103. Health insurance increases. Right now we have this as we could say a placeholder amount. We know that in any event, even whether we stay with our current insurer or we switch to another insurer, we will see an increase. Right now, this is the lowest projected increase of either scenario. We anticipate that it could be negotiated down a little bit more, but I think you're still looking at probably in this order of magnitude for health insurance increases. The 4% COLA and 1 to 2% merit increase. I've been shifting staff in our performance management system over to a more performance-based compensation system. I'm still proposing a 4% COLA for all staff, and then based on the results of the performance evaluations that are occurring right now, staff could get 2%, they could get 1%. For those that need to improve performance, it could be 0. It will average out to about a 5% increase. This 1.144 number is the same amount as would be a 5% increase across the board. What we're trying to do is incentivize those who obviously go above and beyond throughout the year. This is in response not only to some of the principles I've been trying to instill with our new performance management system, but also feedback we got from last year. I think actually it was Councilor Sutherland that had talked about paying more for high performers and compensating those at lower rungs. So you'll see this. It's different than what I think other jurisdictions are doing, which is either a flat 5 for everybody. My understanding too is that the school system is also asking for a 5, at least in one of their budget scenarios. We don't have the details yet on what their proposal is. Holiday pay, I'll explain what that is briefly. Right now, we do not, if a employee works on a holiday, they do not have an option to take a payment instead of leave. This allows them to take a payment for the hours instead of leave. We carry a lot of leave on our books, so although this might seem like it's $175,000 right out of pocket, the ultimate goal is also to decrease the amount of leave we're carrying on the books, because that is a liability for the city. A new IT position. We have more and more systems coming online. We have more and more needs and threats to address as it comes to IT. We have a relatively small IT staff, so investments in our IT department are going to be a priority for me over the coming year. 2 new deputy sheriffs. This is being put in there predicated on an agreement between the city and the sheriff that these 2 positions would only be performing TDOs, temporary detention orders, and ECOs over that currently the police department has to take care of when a sheriff is not available. That means we've talked a little bit about this in the context of mental health beds and the amount of overtime we're spending on having a police officer off the streets and sitting over in Winchester Medical Center. The understanding between the sheriff and myself is that these 2 positions are to be only used for those types of functions. So that is why I felt comfortable including them in there. 1 new maintenance tech position we have a backlog of maintenance duties. The initial request was for 2, I believe 2 or 3 of these positions. I felt in this scenario, felt comfortable funding 1 of them. The facilities team and the parks facilities team was merged in the last year. So this position also helps take care of the maintenance and custodial aspects of the parks department as well. help us keep on track. Jim Barnett Park is a maintenance-heavy facility due to its size and age, so I am putting this in the first scenario. New inspections positions, this is one for our development services team. Again, a backlog of requests and applications. We are struggling to keep up with it, especially as we crack down more on blighted properties and properties that are out of code. Personnel, I'm going to skip down a little bit. There were other personnel requests. Those are often smaller dollar amount or adjustments to starting pay salaries. We are bringing a couple of our lower, either hard to fill or lower paid positions up to a competitive amount. For many years, people were talking about getting employees to $15. The reality now, especially given the market the market for talent, which has dramatically changed in the last year, I can't hire anybody for less than 15, much less. And that goes bus drivers, part-time staff out at Jim Barnett Park, child care workers. Getting somebody for less than 15 is almost impossible. So we're jumping a lot of folks up just to be competitive and fill those part-time and hard-to-fill positions. The department operating request, that $960, that really covers a lot of things that are, I would say almost all of them are essential, whether it's increases in maintenance contracts, increases in costs of materials, chemicals, supplies through public service. What you're seeing in that amount is really a lot of the pressure facing the city based on inflation. Schools, we do not know yet what the school's request is going to be, but we've been told it's going to be somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 million. I don't have any details on that yet. They just started their budget discussions. I think they had their first meeting last week, if I'm not mistaken. We felt comfortable in this scenario. 1.5 was probably more than I felt comfortable putting in. Not knowing what's in their request yet, I put 1 million in this scenario, just as really as a placeholder more than anything else. You'll get more on the school's budget here in the next few weeks, my understanding. I'm going to go down one more. Another big increase that you'll see is the regional jail. That's a $550,000 increase driven primarily by increase in meals cost, increase in health insurance, increases in utilities. This is, I think, a reasonable amount to put in. Initially, 2 months ago, when we were first looking at what the increase from the detention center might be, we anticipated it might be close to $1 million. It's coming in at closer to 550 because the staff have been able to find some efficiencies. They've been able to negotiate some things down, and some of the health insurance costs have decreased. So I don't want to say we're fortunate, but 550 is better than close to $1 million. Then the rest is standard things we have requested. There was, I know a lot of you received letters from the Historical Society about I think their request was about $175,000 to put new bathrooms or do a renovation of the bathrooms over at the George Washington Museum. In talking with staff, we do have public restrooms very nearby, and we found we have some lower cost proposals to make that bathroom there at the center a little more appealing, I guess, for lack of a better word. But I didn't feel comfortable putting that particular request in this scenario. I'm going to move forward to scenario 2. This scenario does include a 0.5% increase in the meals tax. So you see that brings our total new revenue up to a little over $6.7 million. The biggest change here, and I'll just walk through the differences between this scenario and the last scenario. I would like to add a administrative services director position. This position would allow us to consolidate many of the internal service functions under one umbrella, with Mary taking on the deputy city manager role and overseeing public services, parks and rec, and a few other small pieces, to take a lot of the administrative day-to-day burden off of myself and Mary, and have those particular functions clustered under one person. We are proposing adding this position mid-year. That is one change. That is one difference between this scenario and the last scenario.
Where is that?
That is the
Fifth line down.
fifth. I think the fifth thing down on the
See the 73
new
too.
administrative services director, half year. You just scroll down to the next.
It's an option 2.
Got it. Got it. An additional maintenance technician is also in this request. Like I said, I could easily add 3 given the demands and the needs of that particular team, but 2 is what we're going to go with for now. The employee clinic is in this scenario. That is $144,000. It is that amount because we are using some stimulus money for a lot of the upfront and one-time costs. There is also some offsetting expenses that that the clinic will help alleviate, such as employee physicals, other things that we already pay for. So that allows us to do this for $144,000. It is possible that this also gets us to a lower rate in the future on our health insurance, but no confirmations of that now. The other big shift in here, although it's not reflected in this, there are some additional public safety vehicles. We have caught up. Well, I'll say we are close to catching up. We used a lot of stimulus money to replace police cars. We still have a good portion of the fleet that needs to be replaced. So this scenario also replaces some aging public safety vehicles. And then this particular scenario has 1.25 for schools as opposed to 1 as a placeholder. Those are the 2 scenarios. Happy to answer any questions you might have that we have available, that we have the answers for at this point. Just bearing in mind this is the first kind of opening discussion to get feedback on the committee's priorities.
Council Sullivan?
Yeah. Obviously bouncing back and forth between the requests, option 1, option 2, trying to see the variations. In all cases, the workers' comp increase and the health insurance increase, are those projections, or do we have hard number proposals from the carriers?
The workers' comp increases, those are pretty specific. We're confident in that number.
Okay.
The health insurance increase, that is dependent on a couple of different scenarios, whether or not we stay with our current provider or switch providers. I don't want to get into a lot of those details now because they're contracts that we're still actively managing, but we're pretty confident that that health insurance increase is going to be right about that amount. It could come in a little less. I don't think it'll be much more. So it's a conservative amount, but even if it were to come in a little bit less, it's not going to be $200,000. It's, we might see a
30,000.
maybe 5 or 10% decrease at most.
So when does that lock down for us?
We're working on that now. I've already had staff start the process of looking at what switching providers would mean, and we're taking the initial steps to make that happen.
Okay.
The quotes that we have gotten, the initial quotes that we've gotten from our current provider are prohibitively high. So that is, unless that amount is negotiated to what I think is an unrealistic degree down, I think it's highly likely that we'll be looking at other options.
Yeah, and I mean, I heard what you said before about the wellness center, the employee wellness center, and I think if you're negotiating with new carriers, kind of almost kind of having that part of the negotiation, if we fund this, if we have this, how will you treat us? Not, we'll do this and let's see what happens.
Yes. I believe both of the current options, we've discussed that. I know we've discussed it with our current, and we discussed it with the alternative at this point. Yeah, we've discussed it with both of them.
Okay.
So I think until they see exactly how it's structured, how it's applied, and how it's used, you know, it's going to be hard for them to give us an amount, but we know
Sure.
that in the future there will be some form of a discount. I'll say our current carrier, they are very well aware of our plans. We've talked to them at length about this option for the past year, and the amount that they came back to us with was still $1.6 million higher than we currently pay. So I'm not incredibly optimistic it's going to move the needle a tremendous amount, but at those offsetting costs that I mentioned earlier, those aren't insignificant. We pay, I think it was $60,000 a year in, you know, physicals and screenings, all the occupational health stuff we have to do for employees. So that's something we can do in-house. So this amount reflects, you know, a savings in some areas.
2 more questions, if I can. So one is just what do we know about the infrastructure bill? I know that's kind of one-time lump sum stuff, but as it relates to funding needs of the city, do we see the horizon on that?
We don't know enough to make any projections about that now.
Okay.
We do hope that there will be more in there, something in the infrastructure bill, particularly for stormwater. Yeah, that's probably our biggest need. We will be coming back to you with some discussions about a stormwater fee. Last time we talked to council about that, it was 2018. At that point, council did not want to pursue that option.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to put it in front of you again. Council's asked us to look for revenue sources, and this is a revenue source that funds one of our, if not our biggest infrastructure need. So we have set aside money in our current ARPA stimulus for additional stormwater, but it won't, I mean, I think we're setting aside, if memory serves, close to $1 million for stormwater in our current.
Yeah.
And I could do, I don't want to speak for Perry, but I could easily do much, much more than that and still be struggling to meet the need.
Well, with that in mind, you know, when I see the budget request of 3 maintenance technicians, I know it feels like we're always playing catch up, and the demands on our staff. The maintenance technicians are they public works operations? Are they facilities?
They're facilities.
They're facilities.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I know public works from the stormwater management, you know, from the maintenance of our stormwater structures and drainage ways. That's not, these proposed aren't even.
No. We do have, in the last budget, we did add staff to public services, but that was mainly around relining a utility team to help deal with, that didn't deal with stormwater, that was mainly the water utility and relining pipes and addressing water mains and things like that. So there's no, for a lot of our stormwater projects, it's less, of course there's always maintenance to be done, but at this point it's really projects we need to address. It's bigger projects. You can only do so much just clearing the same drains. At this point there are areas, Kent Street's a perfect example. You know, it's a multi-million-dollar stormwater improvement project that once done we'll need to maintain, but we need right now we need the capital, we need money to actually implement some of these solutions. One that came up, for example, during the conversations about the preserve. You know, we know that there's a need for some to address city stormwater in that particular neighborhood. You know, we know what the proposed solution is. It's $1 million fix, and it got a lot of attention at that particular point in time. What we try to remind council and residents of at that point is, yes, we know what it is, what it would cost to fix that. It's $1 million. It still wasn't even at the top of our list. There are other more severe positions. So that's $1 million, mitigation, and it's not even top of our list. So there's a pretty significant backlog of stormwater issues that I'm sure last spring, was it? Last spring or summer when we got the heavy rains. I mean, you could see different parts of the city, you know, just sheets, rivers of water coming down Braddock in various places, right out here on Boscawen. another great example. They don't call it Water Street for nothing. And Town Run is, not really sufficient to handle a significant event. We've been lucky so far.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Sullivan.
Thank you. So, in the option 2, that includes the meals tax, we're saying that a half a cent meals tax would generate how much more in revenue?
About 750,000.
About 750.
Mhm.
Okay. And then for the jail increase, it's a regional jail, obviously. Remind me again how we're the fiscal agent, I believe.
We are not the fiscal agent for the adult center.
For the adults.
We are the fiscal agent for the juvenile detention center.
Okay, so again, are other localities looking at the same increase, the $550,000?
The county is looking at more. Frederick County is looking at more. Our share actually went down a couple of percentage points. Yeah.
And it's share based on inmate population?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a direct.
Yeah, so it goes Frederick County, us, and then is it Shenandoah is the one after that? Clark.
Warren, Shenandoah, Warren, and Page.
Yeah, and but the
Fauquier.
Fauquier, yeah. Now we're the two biggest by far. Frederick County and Winchester are the. I think we probably make up 75–80% of it.
Mm-hmm.
So Frederick County is getting. I think their percentage is a little bit more, so they're actually getting a bigger hit than we are, and their shares actually went up a little bit.
I think theirs was close to $1 million.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. The request for the schools is always a big one. It's always usually, the biggest line item each year. And we kind of horse trade it. We don't have a really good policy because and so it varies every year. The only thing I would say about kind of what's happening this year and things that I've heard is that the school population is down. The number of students is down. And so I think that needs to be taken into consideration when we look at the funding and get a number of some basis to go on. The cost per student, what is it? What are we? Doesn't make your job any easier to kind of just have to do this every year without some sort of baseline and say it's X, Y, Z. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we should do. So that's this early in the discussion. That's all the input I would have on that. But I think the way we do it, and I've seen several council members go through it and city managers, it's just awkward every year. And I think we need to get away from that awkwardness and get to something more accounting based, a little more mathematical maybe to make it easier on everybody. So I don't know what that would be.
I had that on my list as well.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But and I tend to agree because basically when you put a number out like that, 15, 1.5, 1.2, there's almost, and this early in the game, there's almost an expectation that, let's say for instance, if their ask is 1.1, say, well, if they're putting in their budget 1.5, 1.2, then let's revisit that and then we can bump it up. I think we put ourselves in a murky situation by expecting to pay out that amount of money. And I think it was less last year that we gave.
Well, these timelines are awkward. Like we have to do what we have to do, but our meetings this week, theirs is next week, so it's that's kind of the way it is.
It's always an awkward dance, and I think now that you have an elected school board, or you're shifting to an elected school board, it unfortunately, I've seen this in other jurisdictions where they're elected, it doesn't get easier once you have two elected bodies.
No, certainly not. Yeah.
So it would, I'm not making any judgment statements about elected versus appointed school boards, but it definitely makes that complication a little more, conversation a little more complicated for sure. And that particular amount, their request is pretty high. I'm not endorsing either of the numbers. We're just putting it in as a placeholder. Their costs, not dissimilar to us. Their costs are also going up. I'm sure their health insurance, especially given their population has gone up higher than ours. Materials, all the inflationary pressures that we face, they face as well. So, in my conversations with the superintendent, 85 right now, just their COLA alone, and my understanding is they're looking at 5%. That's 85% of their request. So, once we have more detail, I leave it to council to determine what the appropriate number is.
Okay. Still not. Have we a tough discussion to have, very difficult, and I'll be careful how I lead off. So we're seeing a lot of increases for IT, and I can give you my example of what I do. People based all around the world and no fixed IT department. And I'm not saying that we're going to need some people in-house. We always will. That's always going to be the case. But I think to do it all on our own is something maybe we should evaluate and maybe get a 3 to 5 year plan to consider, are we maximizing our, the ROI on the way we handle IT.
Absolutely.
The equipment's not going to get any expensive, or going to get any less expensive. All the reasons that we can list that go into that. And I would just like to maybe start that discussion. And that's about all we can do in a single budget year is maybe consider it. I know it's expensive, but it just seems like one area where the rest of the world's kind of going this way, and city government is kind of going this way, or at least they're stagnant in the way we're kind of approaching some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So
this particular, I completely agree, and actually, it's a lot of our internal conversations have been along that same vein. This administrative services director position would oversee the ID department, and what we're trying to move towards is more of a project management based approach, to having a PMO that can really start taking a look at these projects strategically to determine, is this something that's going to improve efficiency? Are we going to be able to cut costs because of this? And understand what the requirements are. For a long time, the city's kind of taken it. We've definitely grown and improved our IT department, especially over the last few years. Still a ways to go to get to a point where we're actually across the city, not just with the IT functions that our IT team currently oversees, but really across the city, looking at larger investments to determine where do they fit in our overall enterprise architecture, what kinds of security considerations, future costs, moving things from on-premises to the cloud. I want us to get into that more PMO-based approach so that we can start quantifying things to council if we're going to make an investment in a system. Because a lot of these, especially some of these old legacy systems, we're moving from, and the city still has a handful of much older systems that we have been either out of support, haven't been updated in a long time, have security vulnerabilities, and we're proposing to replace them with a cloud-based system that is no longer, that's now subscription-based. So we see operating costs go up instead of capital costs for new system acquisition. It might be replacing a system that allows for greater efficiencies in workflow. So are we saving on paper or staff time? I'm always hesitant to bring that to council because so much of it is just kind of, you know, oh, we're going to save some money on paper. Well, and hard to quantify because I've seen many, many proposals for IT projects claim, you know, windfall savings, and none of it actually matriculates because they weren't looking at the right measures. A lot of times these systems just need to be replaced because they're old and vulnerable. You're not going to get an efficiency out of them. But I should have the ability to come to you and tell you that, you know, right up front. We have to replace this because it's broken or it's vulnerable. Or, good example is the money we've set aside for Commissioner of Revenue and replacing those systems. Significant opportunity for efficiency and savings there.
Is that that specific item being addressed this year?
It's in. We have set aside money in our stimulus package for it. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
To study it or what? To just do it?
We have money to do it,
Okay.
and that's the ARPA stuff is not reflected in here in this
Okay.
budget. So, if there was something that we could do in talks with the team, if there was something we could do with one-time money, which is stimulus money, we moved it over there. We do have a few one-time things in here, of course, but we tried to put as much in ARPA as we could.
Okay. Thank you. That's
Okay. Thank you. I have a few questions here, but I do want to go back to the school. I don't know what the remedy is for putting in a number, but it possibly what would be helpful is just maybe to put as a placeholder what we gave out the year before, not to get people's hopes up of what could, so that could be adjusted, like these numbers can be adjusted. And so since there's really no mathematical equation of why this number is here, correct?
There is no logic to it other than we took, you know, conversation with the superintendent. I took the initial number, multiplied it by 0.85 since he said 85% roughly was going to raises, and that was part of it. The $1 million was just, we cut off a third. I don't think last year's number is a realistic number. And just in knowing our operation, I know that there's, with the increase in costs, you know, just supplies alone would probably necessitate a couple $100,000 more than last year.
Right.
So that's why I put $1 million in there as possible. It's very possible I revise this number down once we see more detail from them. It's probably unlikely.
Well, we all know that the enrollment numbers are down, but you still have teachers to pay that are there.
Absolutely.
And so.
And my
that's a
understanding,
given.
just to dispel something I spoke with the superintendent, they're not laying off teachers.
Right.
There was some talk of that. I'm not aware of any teacher layoffs. So, and fewer students does mean less state money. So, I could understand why that's a driver for them.
If and just staying on this a bit, if we could possibly, as a body, meet with them, let's say towards the end of the year each year, and because they might, hopefully, and you can check with the superintendent, have an idea of what their ask is going to be, even if it's just a rough draft. And so when we start our process, then we can at least put some numbers in there. And so the item for the 2 new deputy sheriffs, in both of them. Now, I know that this hopefully will, this will be a dedicated job which will allow our police officers to get back and do what they need to do. With some of the money that we've gotten from ARPA and federal funds, can any of that money be used?
I wouldn't put it in for this particular use just because it's ongoing. We've been very careful. I can't say we've always avoided paying for new staff with it. We've done that in a few limited instances with stimulus money, but we're pretty careful to not fund ongoing expenses with it. So assuming these are positions that we carry forward for several years, we felt it was better in the general fund. It's not to say you couldn't potentially use some stimulus money for it out of revenue replacement, but most of our stimulus money at this point is spoken for. It's either assigned to a project or already spent in some cases. So the next chance you'll have to kind of look at the council has not yet approved our spending plan for the next tranche that we'll get in July. But that's, the draft's been presented to council. We haven't gotten any feedback. So it is something to consider as an option, but just keep in mind it would be using one-time money for an ongoing expense.
So with that being said, okay, and I see, so with Wintran, we're offered 2 years of free ridership. So the money that we would have used for Wintran services, where is that money?
That's a wholly separate federal stream of funds, so that couldn't be used for any other purpose other than Wintran. So we couldn't use the subsidy we're currently getting from the feds. I mean, that's dedicated specifically to transit.
Right, I understand that, but the city funding part of it.
We never funded that sufficient. I mean, the Wintran is so heavily subsidized by the feds and state.
It's like 95% or something.
Is it?
Yeah,
No,
yeah. We almost. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. There's generally some, but it's not.
300,000.
Yeah, 300,000 total.
Yeah.
Out of how much?
Say it again now?
About 300,000.
300,000
That
what?
the city would fund transit each year
Yeah, out of how much for
for the total program.
what's the total transit budget?
So the city funds $300,000 a year for Wintran, but so we have 2 years where we're not funding that 300. So
No. We're still funding that. Oh, we're not?
No.
We use that for one-time funds, this current
Okay.
budget. We're using it for one-time funds for some equipment, and that's in the current budget. That's kind of what that's set aside to.
But what is our total Wintran spend?
For the, I want to say, around 2.5, 3.
2.5 to 3, so I think it's all 10% we
Yeah, so the city only contributes 10%, and that money, what I'm hearing is that that's used for one time. Again, Wintran expenses or other. So, yeah.
So the city funds $300,000 a year for Wintran. There's 2 years of not funding it. I think it's a $600,000. My question is, what's happening with that $600,000 now?
Well, for this year, we're buying one-time equipment.
With the
Well, for this vehicle,
300,000?
Yes.
Okay.
Those type of things. We're
And then
one-time
next year?
Same type of deal, yeah.
Okay,
We have money in the cars.
okay.
Yeah.
So the money's spent.
Yes.
That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, it's spent, sorry.
Sorry,
Okay.
we were overthinking.
But it's spent.
Right.
But to your point, if I may.
Yeah.
We don't always, that doesn't always filter down to us with that detail, that I don't think it does. I mean, that's why you're asking questions, what happened to money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree, the scenario that I was.
All that details in the budget. Just
It is.
Okay.
But we don't sit around and talk about it.
Yeah.
We don't
Last year,
dwell.
we had a big slide about one time. It was
Yeah.
hard. We had a slide of one-time items and.
Yeah.
Right. So one that always, like, I've somehow convinced myself or whatever, tin hat, whatever, is that, I'll use a round number, let's say last year there was $1 million in the budget for snow removal. Hypothetically, I work with you
Yeah.
and then it didn't snow.
Yeah.
But yet, we set a tax rate
Mhm.
and raise that revenue. We didn't spend the money.
Yeah.
We come back the next year, and now we want to do a tax increase. Well, whoa, where's the $1 million you didn't spend? Right?
So in that, just so no one who might be watching this committee meeting, how much do we set aside for snow removal?
Absolutely correct one number. Yeah.
Yeah, just to make, and I get the analogy
Yeah.
for sure.
And it's state money, so it's not funded by the general funds.
Yeah.
Not tax dollars.
Okay, so that's our snow removal money's from somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you got me again. But you see what I'm saying?
But I think to your point, in those situations, where we don't, I mean, it either it goes into fund balance and we let you know, but if we were to repurpose, money that was, we would come back to you to get approval to move it around.
Okay.
There are some cases where we do shift smaller amounts, from salary here's to salary there, if it's, but, I don't know of any situation where we have $1 million or any significant amount of money set aside for a purpose, at least a regular recurring expense, and then not use it. It's not to say occasionally we don't change our mind and do something different, but we come back to you with any of the major ones for sure.
Right. And that was and not to keep beating this to death, but that's always been kind of that's difficult to explain to folks is that, well, you set this rate, you raise this money, it goes here. Where did you spend it? And sometimes it's a little, it can be hard to really explain that in detail. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, that's why we're having this conversation, because the everyday Joe would want to know that, and there's even people out there that are smarter than me that would also want to know the answers to this. It's like, well, if we got surplus or funded for this, then what happens to that? And so
it's really easy for that kind of Joe and Q public to see one thing in the paper and then make a jump to it. We saw that with stimulus money when that all was coming down the pipe, and people thought, well, there's $12 million, slash my taxes. Why can't you do that?
Yeah.
It's very complex. I mean, that's why we have an entire inside academy just to explain the budget to folks who are interested. Government budgets are not simple things.
I have a couple more questions. I'm perplexed by this. The Historical Society, 205,000 versus 15,000.
175 of that was the bathrooms that I did not fund. They did not propose funding.
175,000 for bathrooms?
Yeah. They did request 30 for salary increases that I put 15 in.
How many bathrooms are we talking about?
It's one. It's one bathroom.
One bathroom for
Yeah.
$175,000?
Yeah. So we did in the.
What kind of toilets does it have in it? Is that like gold toilets?
Now, my understanding, it is currently a very austere bathroom.
Is it outside?
It is basically an outside bathroom.
I don't think they're folks, so they have to comply, ADA compliance and everything.
Yeah.
No, where's the location?
It's the George Washington. It's on that little property there. There's
Oh.
But
yeah.
it would be a place that would have bathroom,
Yeah.
there's a restroom in the back.
Yeah. It was George Washington's outhouse.
Looks
But,
like all
no,
that
I'm just
thing
kidding.
to
It
the
was
top.
not.
More or less, yes. That's what
Yeah.
we're talking. Yeah.
It is very old, and I don't mean to act like it doesn't need to occur at some point, but it is one restroom for a facility that's open part of the year, and we do have the public bathrooms next to the splash pad that are, a stone's throw away. We did put, I believe it was 20,000 in the facilities budget to make some improvements to that bathroom, but I just couldn't put 175 in for
That's a lot of
full
money.
renovation.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. If there is some repairs that need to be done, I don't think it should be done at the tune of $175,000.
Yeah. And we've asked if the tourism board would maybe fund that. Their response is that they try to fund things that are jointly beneficial because it's a city county tourism board. I understand the logic, but I still, it's not something I felt like I could
So,
fund.
and I have to ask this because it's part of my business as well. So the 0.5% mills tax. Now, I know that this is a pass-through, basically. People come in and then we pass it on to the customer. And I know we had a discussion about this last year and a few years ago, and it keeps coming up. It's almost like it's a fallback where you have the restaurants as a revenue source, as a main revenue source for the city. People are starting to feel comfortable with coming out again and coming out to eat. And it might sound like a broken record, because I remember saying this last year, and we're going to penalize them for coming out to eat by charging them a little bit more. I'm just putting that out there because we need to be mindful. At one point, we're telling people to come out, patronize the restaurants, bars, stores, and things, but we're going to tax you for it. And so, well, we're going to tax you a little bit more for coming out now. So just be mindful of that.
I'm worried it was not I was hoping that the increases in revenue would take care of most things. Last year I was able to keep all of our, with the exception of solid waste, I was able to keep all of them flat. This year, it gave us more wiggle to put that 0.5% in. I didn't want to touch property tax because of the increase last year, and we're in an off assessment year. So same with some of the other sectors that are currently underperforming. Personal property, for example. We just had a conversation the other day about increasing valuations, so people are already getting hit there. Meals tax was a sector that has bounced back and then some based on our revenue rates. So if we were going to pull a lever this year, this is the lever I would select, just because it's currently the only overperforming sector that we have. We don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, of course, but I felt 0.5% was palatable for council to at least consider. Now, if we could, at the end of the day, obviously you don't pass 2 budget scenarios.
Right.
We want to come to one scenario that we pass. And if that includes a combination of these things, if it includes some trimming to get us closer to flat across the board, I'm all for that. But that's why we have these discussions.
Well, and lastly, so talking about the personal property taxes, we find ourselves in a I don't know what you would want to call it, but it's almost like a bubble where we definitely need growth. So for our revenue sources to balance out, and we don't have to keep relying on certain things, so we don't have that many options for revenue sources at this point. The options that we do have is that we bring in more housing so that we can spread the wealth a little bit more. But right now, we're relying on the same taxable stock that we have, and there's no way to spread it out. If we had a little bit more development, and this is part of the budget, and this is why I'm talking about this, because we're going to be talking about it later on this evening with the comp plan. It's very important that the city has some growth, and by having that growth, then you could spread that tax burden out a little bit more, and we won't have to keep going to the same well and keep hitting our citizens for higher and higher taxes. At some point, we'll get to that, and that's all I have to say.
Yeah, that organic growth that you're referring to is critically important. I mean,
I know it is.
Celeste, if we've got general property tax increase of 1.7. We're in a non-assessment year, so that 1.7 is organic growth in essence. So if we did not grow, we would have 1 point. If there was no organic growth, I would be increasing multiple tax rates to make up the $1.7 million gap we had if there was no organic growth. So yes, it's a huge part of what we do, and that's why even the decisions that were recently made around the valuation process for personal property tax, that was a $400,000 decrease in net new revenue. So this number, this 5.96 number, without factoring 0.5% on meals, would have been, we said it was 400,000? Closer to 500,000. So this would be a just using general numbers, this would be 6.46 ballpark. So I probably would not have a scenario that increased the meals tax had that change not been made, because I probably could have fit a lot of these other things into our existing organic growth.
Councilor Sullivan.
Yeah, so as a follow-up to that, Mayor, and maybe you meant to say it, I think that there's obviously growth in housing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But part and parcel of that is our commercial tax base, businesses, whether they're restaurants or dry cleaners or whatever. We can't forget that, when we go to do these things, it's very important that, I think, at least in the direction we're heading, that we make room for those entities as well. For example, the one that we recently approved that's it's going to be out on Pleasant Valley behind the
Lowe's. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's going to be a very big project. But one of the things that I really did like about it was it had some commercial aspect to it, that it was not all, just housing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's, I think it's important that we do have that mix and that balance, as far as attracting, another large industrial entity, that's challenging for us because obviously for the limitations that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to kind of we have to get a different approach. And I think we've done a pretty good job. I mean, there's things that are working against us. We do have some sites that are underutilized.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's, just the reality of what we face. So, thank you.
Councilor Bell.
Just for a couple of follow-ups, and I have not been tracking what's going on with the grocery tax at the state level. Does any of that impact our local budget?
Have we factored in that? I don't think we factored any of that in at this point.
So if there's a reduction or termination of that grocery tax, does any of that come to us through state revenue sharing?
The groceries tax does, yes.
All of it or a portion?
You want to consider?
Was it 1%? Yeah.
Okay, so that's an unknown right now as
It's
it
an unknown
relates to
for
the
us.
budget.
We
Because
don't
I don't
know
even,
working through that.
I don't even know what magnitude of number that would be as it relates to our budget.
We don't see the breakdown in our office.
Okay.
I work with Commissioner Burkholder on it. I know VML has been working with localities to see if that does come to fruition, where the state could help plug that. I know they're working through it.
Got it. Okay, so I think that's helpful for us to understand or see coming. I want to go back to Winchester Public Schools, having, spent 8 years on the school board, I do recognize how some of that works on their side of the equation. And I do want to reiterate, if they are reducing staff by 2, that means instead of hiring 40 new teachers, they're only going to hire 38. And I made that 40 number up. It's probably much higher than that because they are significantly more staff intensive than even the city staff.
Yeah.
So if we see increases in just cost of living, healthcare on our side, it's magnified over there. So I think it's a little myopic for us to say we should just pick a number and plug it into a hole we need to treat them just like we would our department reports that say, this is what I need for my operations, and not, yeah, we'll give you whatever we think you need. Keeping in mind that the last year I was on the board, there was a across-the-board cut going into COVID of $1 million or more that was their operating budget, and that's never been replenished. So that was cuts in something that they had to figure out how to balance that budget, just like we did on the city side. But we cannot forget that, or at least have to acknowledge, yeah, we know that, and we're sorry, but here's where we are. So I just think I think it would be good for us to get that budgetary placeholder from the department. You know, again, between you and the superintendent, there's got to be some viability and some credibility to it to say, come on, Jason, I'm not, $6 million, I'm not putting that in there. What do you really need? So we've got to take them from some value assessment and then work from there. Yeah. So if we're taking a haircut on this side, they're going to have to join into it as well. If we're giving 5% raises on our staff, but saying, I don't know why you need to give your teachers so much money, that doesn't balance the equation out very well.
Yeah,
So
Jason's aware of, the superintendent is aware of this particular placeholder amount.
Sure.
And I explained to him, he talked a little bit about kind of the conversations they're currently having. I didn't even indicate earlier that it's kind of plucked it out of the air. There was definitely a conversation to say, I'm not going to put in 1.5. I'm going to put these numbers in as placeholders unless you have a significant, reason why I can't, or there's some type of issue that I'm not seeing because I don't have full visibility into those discussions. And he understood. Obviously, they're still going through their process, so it's not as if he endorses either of these numbers at this point, but they're in the realm of possibility and reality, put it that way.
Okay.
What they end up being, more or less, we'll find that out over the next few weeks.
And our budget cycle with WPS and the city are closely aligned, but they're a little out of step. But they have to, sometimes they run into a situation where we don't approve our budget till we have the state revenue stream locked in. We can't approve our budget, they can't approve theirs, but they have to approve their budget to enter into contract negotiations with their teachers that start in June. So I know there's not an ambiguity about that, but I think making sure we have a more clear, linear understanding of how we work with that critical asset of the community is important.
Yeah. And we're doing things, Celeste and Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to say we're ahead of schedule, but we're kind of on track to mirror some of what they're doing. I think they just had their first big budget meeting last week, I think it was. So we're positioned this year where we're not lagging several weeks behind them, and we can kind of mirror them, for lack of a better word. And this year, because it's a non-assessment year, and because currently there's no proposal to increase the property tax rate, we don't have to do we don't have to publish the not to exceed rate before we pass the budget. So I know that's been a question a lot. I think Councilor Sullivan's brought that up in the past. We checked with Melissa. As long as we're at 93 cents, it's a non-assessment year. We don't have to go through the process of setting the not to exceed rate in advance. Obviously, we have to set the tax rate, but we don't have to go through that process like we normally do. Did I misstate anything there?
So lastly, and sticking just with the schools, there's always been a point of contention that if they have a surplus, and we sort of, but they still come with a big ask, and they have the surplus, and council has always felt uncomfortable with giving, let's say 1.5 if they have a $200,000, $300,000 surplus from monies that they didn't use that were given. is something that, that needs to be factored in as well. Why are we giving money when they have that sort of?
Well, I think one thing to understand there is their annual operating budget isn't as heavy in capital projects because of their reliance on the MOU for the surplus. So if they have surplus, they've already spent it on unbudgeted capital projects. If we tighten up the MOU or eliminate that, they're just going to increase their general budget to say, well, these are capital projects that I got to take care of. So this gives them some flexibility if they manage their budget properly and they can create that surplus, then they can fund those capital projects that they didn't budget through the general fund.
And that's the operating word, if.
Well, I mean, if you manage a $58 million budget and can come within 1% of hitting it without going over, I think that's pretty good.
That's all I had.
I tend to agree. I mean, it's complicated. We kind of do this every year. And I just maybe go in a slightly different direction. I mean, we kind of get into the weeds on all these line items and things like that. I mean, it's a lot to digest. And so sometimes it's easier as a council member to just to say, what did we spend last year? This rate gets us this much money. And am I, as a council member, willing to increase this $92 million budget by X amount of dollars? And the rest of this is kind of it's good to know, but it can also be a little too much information. I don't know. I mean, it's sort of like, we know that inflation's high, so okay, we were X amount this year, I got to bump you 5%, do your thing. And kind of take that approach, much more higher level sort of board of directors approach, as opposed to, because what are my real options here? Make a motion to strike one of these line items? I mean, we haven't, my whole time on council, we've never gone down that road, but it's an option.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's why we're
Yeah.
having the conversation. If you guys don't,
We've never done that.
for example, if you wanted to get to option 1, just tell me what on option 2 you don't want to do, or.
Then that would be my request coming back is and I could probably go back and figure it out and say, this was your budget last year. This is, if 2% increase gets me this much revenue, 3% gets me this much, and I think that at some point that is going to be a part of it, because that's the way we've done it in the past.
And I think in the past, when city managers put these in here, it's more or less to justify the ask and why they're spending the money. And I'm with Councilor Sullivan on this, that if you just tell us how much you need, and then we can give it to know, because and that has always been the concern, and yes, I'm going to put this out here. This has always been the concern of the school board of giving council their budget, because there was always this hesitancy or fear that the council would go the line item budget on the school board and say, do you really need this and that? But that's not our job. Our job basically is to make sure that the departments and the schools are funded. They are their own entities, and they, if they don't spend the money wisely, that they will have to answer to us.
Absolutely.
But if they're asking for a certain amount of money to help run the city, to make sure that our residents get what they get, then they better well use that money for those purposes.
Yeah.
If they're not, then that's another circumstances. So,
Well, I mean, the only question before that we need guidance on today really is scenario 2 palatable or unpalatable? If a 0.5% increase, that's that first board of director level decision is. If no, we want to keep all our rates flat, then that's option 1, and I'm bringing you up, and you've got that. So that's a 0% increase in our rates. Organic growth does get us some additional money. if you want the overall budget to only go up by a certain percentage. So somebody help me do some back of the napkin math. An increase in 5.9 million, let's just say 6 million.
So Mary, do you want to come up here, because I don't think
Mary or
there's a camera.
Celeste, actually, Celeste might be.
She's getting her
She's
calculator.
Celeste is the finance director, so she is the woman with the numbers. So if council says we only want the general fund budget to increase by 3% this year,
You want, like, the total?
what
original
percentage?
budget?
What percentage
Like
is
what
that?
is-
Is well, what percentage is 6 million of our current?
So that would be about a 1 point,
Yeah.
over $1 million increase over the current $93 million budget that
Yeah.
we have in the general fund.
So, if you don't mind, we're at 93 now.
93 million.
Okay, so the way this is presented, we would basically be going from 93 to 98, 99?
Yeah, so we would be adding 5.96 under option 1. We'd be adding 5.96 because
But
of
that's
that
in
organic
revenue.
growth.
That's organic growth of the revenue.
So if you were, so, and that is a
So
2.
that's about a 6% increase.
That's about a 6% increase. If
Organically.
organically, a 6% increase without
And then
raising.
you've taken, sorry not to keep cutting you off,
No.
you've taken that organic growth and you said, this is what I'm gonna spend
Yep.
that money on.
Absolutely.
This is our reallocating.
And some of it, we have no option. So if council were to come to me and say, you know what, 6% is way too much growth, we only want 3%. Well, just my required, I mean, there'd be no COLAs for anybody this year, right? Those are the kind of things that we have to balance. So even if, and granted, some boards, some elected bodies, you know, that's the approach they want to take. And sometimes we have to, if there's a budget issue or problem, like, you know, maybe during COVID, we made a significant amount of cuts to put ourselves on a good conservative financial footing. No problems. Nobody got any COLAs that year. We're not in that position. So just to keep up with inflation and, you know, natural increases in expenses, you know, a 6% increase in the budget without touching any rates covers that. We can do what we need to do without touching any tax rates this year. Anything less
And
than
that's
that.
option 1.
That's option 1. The only thing that goes up
That's
next year.
option 1 without, pardon me, us looking at it and say, cut here, here, here.
Exactly. Yeah, you get, the only thing that goes up is the solid waste fee, which you've already approved to go up by a couple bucks. So solid waste fee, put that off to the side. Option 1 includes 0 rate increases. So that's your tax flat amount. The only rate increase in option 2 is meals. So.
It seems, I mean, with the meals though, if we're only getting, we're getting $750,000 in meals, is that directly, so we're going 5.68 to 6.7, but we've reallocated some things within that option 2.
We've added some things.
You just
We've
flat out added some things.
We added $750,000 of things that we would like to do, but don't feel comfortable doing without an increase.
Okay, so it's option 1 plus some things, not option 1 adding.
Yeah, option 2 is exactly the same as option 1, except we've added about $750,000 worth of expenditures.
But these are expenditures that we can do without for now.
I could live without them. I think they do
And I said for now.
for now. Yeah, absolutely.
Because we're early in this, we're not going to solve this today.
But we need to,
Give some direction. Yeah, so my input, and you can certainly, I would like to see, we know what option 1 is. I need to see option 2 and get a sense of, highlight the ones that are somehow new. Say this is not, you know, give me a plus and minus column.
Mm-hmm. So
he can do that now.
I just did. So, new administrative services director, additional maintenance tech, $250 for schools, employee wellness clinic, and then there's a few other smaller requests. Those are the 4 big ticket items that get us closer to that 750. Oh, and additional, I think we did additional public safety vehicles. We did about, I think, 3 more vehicles in there as well. So that's where that extra 750 goes. Now, if there were things in option 1 that you wanted to cut and move some things from one of those things in option 2 over, this is your menu right now.
So basically, and I'm just going to get my input and then I'll come to you.
Sure.
I like option 1 because we're not increasing any rates. And we can work within that to make some adjustments.
So for example, you could look at option 1 and 2, to the mayor's point. No rate increases, we want to keep it within the existing flat. You like the employee clinic, you want to try to wedge that into option 1. Just tell me what in option 1 you'd like to decrease. If you want to cut some vehicles, or you wanted to cut
the bathroom.
The bathroom's already cut. Already cut.
That's it. But it's only cut in option 2.
No, it's cut in both. I did not propose. I didn't propose that in any scenario. Sorry, historical society.
Sorry, the first, the one you're probably looking at is the request.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
There's 3 tables.
Yep. That's what I was looking at. Yep.
Exactly.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
the first was your request, the second one's what you're actually.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Or let's say hey, we're only going to do 800,000 for schools. Okay, well we now can do something out of option 2, and we can put it in option 1. Just think of it as an a la carte thing. At the end of the day, if you don't want to increase any of the rates, 5.961.
Council Bell.
Yeah, just with the very last item right there, fund balance. When you go up to I've been trying to kind of compare both option 1 and option 2, but in the fund balance, it's the only revenue stream that varies, meaning it was 571, but in option 1 and option 2, it's only 244.
We use, so in the general fund request, remember, this was everything. This is not really a scenario.
Yep.
Fund balance is higher here. We're using, less, because we're using less of fund balance. So we still use, in this situation, relative to.
So you're using less in the requests.
In the request option,
Yep.
that fund balance use is actually, so we're using 0 fund balance in the request.
Right.
Because we used 517,000 last year, so we kind of start back with the base, so that's why I cut that out.
Okay.
So and then the next option 1, we're using a little bit of fund balance on some of those one-time amounts.
One-time expense.
Got it.
Yep.
Everything else makes sense now?
So, do you have any further questions?
I mean, we're going to see this a number of times more.
Yeah, but and I think the direction, if we give staff the direction of one of these options, then it gives council a base to work from.
Now, if you don't want to rule out anything at this point, again, we're going to have 3 or 4 meetings.
Right.
So if at this
Right.
point, if you tell me, come back with a scenario that includes no meals tax increase, but includes these things in option 2 that I like, we'll come back with a scenario that has that.
Well,
Or just don't tell me now.
Well,
I'll do
option
the next
one,
meeting.
well, option 1 gives us what your
Your minimum.
That's
right, and that's something that I think council would appreciate if they can work from there, and then just play around, because for the most part, all the departments are getting something that have made.
Yeah, there were only, when we followed up with departments to kind of tell them where my recommendations landed, there were no departments that got, they were all very reasonable in their
Okay.
requests. Nothing outlandish. We're making significant, right now we're talking, a lot of raw dollar amounts, but this budget does make significant investments in public safety and our internal functions to make sure that they're safe and secure and efficient for residences. We are making, through stimulus money, a lot of investments in parks and the park system. So that is allowing us in this budget year to really cover a lot of different bases. I can't guarantee that'll be true next year or the year after when the flow of federal money stops.
Well, in that case,
the only thing that is, in my opinion, beneficial about a meals tax increase is that it does capture money from non-Winchester residents. That would really be the only
portion.
A portion, yeah. That it's.
I eat out.
I do too. I do too. But a lot of people come into the city. You know, I mean, it kind of it doesn't just stick it to residents of 2260, for lack of.
well, and I've been hearing that argument. It's very difficult to track that.
It is.
Because when you say non-residents, it's like when somebody hands you a credit card to pay for a meal, it's not tracking where they live.
And you don't know everybody, right?
No, we don't. Right, you know, but so we've started some programs where we can see new people coming in, but we don't know where the new people are coming from, like first-time visits and those kind of things. So we wish we had that.
Yeah. I think just to add to that, I think it's a little challenging to view it that way, but it's maybe less challenging to view the meals tax as this is discretionary, those with discretionary income. Whether they live in 22601 or elsewhere, it is those with discretionary income versus those that might be on a fixed budget or living on subsistence. So, that's a way I can kind of get my head wrapped around it, that it's asking people from outside the area to pay for lodging tax. I would buy that.
Well,
not a lot of people in 22601 are staying in hotels, I think.
Right.
I would love for there to be 2 more hotels within the city limits, but as you're all aware, many of them are just outside the city limits, so
Right.
that's where we.
So they need some direction. Because we can beat this, because we're going to be beating this a lot over the next few weeks.
Yeah. Again, you don't have to. This is preliminary discussion, so you don't have to give me direction now.
I would like to at least give you a starting point. So.
I mean, if I had to approve it today, it would be option 1. It would be 1.
Well, then why don't you say that?
Motion to move forward with.
So
well, this is not moving.
Oh, okay.
yeah, there's
No,
nothing
this is
moving
just
forward.
for just say what you're saying, that you like option 1, and then if we concur, then we just.
Yeah, we will hear it. I won't make any changes because again, we're going to go through public safety committee, PED committee, back in front of you to go through the detailed department budget. So you're going to get a look at some of the detailed stuff. Just because you tell me today you prefer option 1, it doesn't mean option 2 goes away.
Right. But the main focus will be on option 1. So I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Are you fine with that?
I think option 1 is prudent, as we can rely on organic growth. That's what's happening, and we can say that we are tax flat. I would like to, at a future meeting, again, I know you said it will probably come to finance again.
There will be another budget discussion at the next finance committee meeting.
But we'll see it
for the first one in April.
I think he sent out a schedule.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
a schedule in your email.
Yeah, so, you probably don't want 9 council people deciding whether or not you need 1 maintenance technician or 2 maintenance technicians.
I want 9 to do that.
I think the thing that I would like to look at further, again, beyond this meeting, the item of holiday pay, just because that kind of falls, to me, that's a staff incentive, retention, recruitment tool. This is new, so I'd want to understand that, how that impacts the dynamic of the employment pool. And then also the wellness clinic, because it's something we wanted to do, and you kind of intimated that, you know, hey, if we do these required OSHA physicals and certifications and other stuff like that, if we can pull it in-house, then maybe it's not 144, it's something different because we've got some cost savings.
The 144 includes the cost savings.
Yeah.
It does,
It's
okay.
actually closer. The
204.
general fund share, 200,000.
200,000, so that's showing some projected cost savings.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
Sorry.
I think that's an important thing. I just would like to understand the holiday pay component
A
in the
little
HR
just
dynamic.
briefly on the holiday pay. So that's the policy that we're proposing here is a policy that we had back in like 2015. So we had changed it to where we didn't pay people who didn't come in on the holiday. We gave them leave. So now we just like to pay everybody. That was a big issue with some of the public safety staff that.
So if it was a non-work day, they just didn't get paid?
Okay.
Basically, we gave them flex time. I mean,
Yeah, we
it's,
gave them
yeah, no, it's-
leave to do some salary, to do some savings, but this
Yeah.
brings back another policy, which
Yeah.
a lot of the departments,
Got it.
as you say, it's a good retention and morale boost for them.
Okay.
Any other discussion?
Motion to adjourn? Whoa, sorry. Did I jump the gun on that
Oh,
one?
you made a motion.
Second.
Or did I misread your intention?
You misread what committee you're in. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh, so moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are now adjourned.